Renee, you know more about this industry than just about anyone. So thank you so much for joining us. I want to start on Ampere, which is basically a chip startup that you have launched, and chip startups are rare for a reason. This is an incredibly expensive industry to compete in. It takes years to build up credibility with customers. Where are you and where is Ampere in that journey? Do you feel like you've crossed that threshold into the bigger leagues?
Well, I don't know if that we've completely crossed over. First of all, thank you for having us on. Ampere is a 3.5-year-old semiconductor startup, but in fact doing high performance microprocessors. So even at the very tippy top of the business, we're focused on building the highest performing, most power efficient microprocessors for the cloud data center. And yeah, it's a tough business. And a lot of people, go into it thinking that it's about the design, and a lot of it ends up being about not only the design, but the supply and the customers and the entire business of being in semis. So I think we had a couple of advantages given the leadership team had a lot of experience in the business, and we've had wonderful investors.
Well, as you alluded to there, you spent most of your career at Intel. You know the company, its resources better than almost anyone else. You were the top ranking woman at Intel, I believe the top ranking woman in Intel history. Yes. What makes you want to take them on or think that you can because you know so much?
Listen, I mean, I would just say, I'm not taking Intel on. Intel is a company I, for one, know a lot about, of course, and have a lot of affinity for. What we are doing is building what comes next. And the history of this industry has always been from mainframes to minis to PCs to PC servers, there's always a platform or something that comes next. So when I left Intel, I thought, there's going to be something next, and if not us, then who? And so we went after it, and I was fortunate enough to raise the money to get the business off the ground. 3.5 years later, we have 2 products in market, top performing. Thank you, Ian King at Bloomberg, who wrote about them. And we also have developed our own core, which is, kind of the heart and soul of semiconductors, is to build the core engine and innovation of the platform. So I would say we're more forward leaning towards what comes next.
Huge shout out to Ian King, who keeps us very well informed on what's happening in your industry. And I have to ask about the shortage. What do you think is happening there? Is there anything that what we've been reporting so far is missing in the narrative in terms of why this is so bad, why there was such a mismatch between supply and demand, and when we're going to be out of this?
Yeah, I am glad that you asked that question. I think I have a slightly different view about it. Do we have a shortage? Yes, we do. I was lucky, again, to have been in the industry long enough to see, tightening starting. So I went to the investors and I said, hey, we got to start putting capacity in place to be able to grow the business at the rate we want to. That said, this is different. This is not, in my opinion, a cyclical shortage. This is a growth of the industry. It's the fundamental growth of semiconductors. And we know that because we see new segments emerging and new users coming to semis for the first time. Electric cars, the broad-based use of inference and artificial intelligence, and new segments of computing where we have double-digit growth that are not the PC, they're not the tablet, they're not the phone, they're new things. Certainly 5G and the edge, all of that is contributing to what I would say is fundamental growth in semiconductors that's here to stay. That's great news. Bad news is we didn't put the capacity in place to meet that growth. And I think we all were a little bit surprised during the pandemic how we continued in semis to grow through it. So one of the things I'm excited about is this administration's approach to creating an investment environment to help put more capacity in place, because this is long-term. We need more capacity in the industry. And I think that's an exciting news for all of us that are, especially me, where we're at in our growth cycle, that there's expansion happening.
Is there anything that you think that the CEOs of the big league companies should be doing differently, whether it's Intel or NVIDIA or Qualcomm, in order to ease this shortage, or is the solution something else?
Well, I'm not sure that they can ease the shortage because they don't own all the supply. I'm certain that Intel and my longtime colleague Pat are doing things that they can do. But what I would say is that the supply chain is very focused on the big players. Because of the history of the industry, the top 10 players made up the predominance of the revenue of the industry in the US semiconductor business. So one thing we have to acknowledge is that the demographic of the business has changed. There are a lot of medium-sized companies and even smaller companies coming into the business. And why? Because fabless technology is so good. TSMC is not the only thing, but there's also the whole supply chain that goes beyond the wafer, that it enables companies like Ampere to exist. And so the supply chain, we need more help from all the players along the way to be able to diversify and support companies that are smaller scale. The entire business is focused on supporting the big guys, and the big guys can pay a lot for capacity. They can handle, surcharges in a shortage. And that is one of the things that I think through the work with the administration, things that we can do in the CHIPS Act, I think those are things that are super important to the long-term health of US semis, which as we now see is an underpinning to lots of other segments of our economy.
Now, I recently spoke with Lisa Su, the CEO of AMD, one of the other few female chip executives in the industry, and I'm curious why women at the top of your industry are so incredibly rare, and whether you're seeing signs that that is changing.
We all loved your book, by the way, Bro Culture. I saw your interview.
Thank you.
I saw your interview with Lisa, and I thought there's really just two of us. There's Lisa and I. So thank you for having me on. You've covered it. I think it's changing. It's changing because everybody's working on diversity. Even the companies that haven't historically been as diverse. I think we're all doing a better job at it. Certainly, Lisa talked about mentorship. I agree with her. She and I both were mentored quite legendarily. I mean, I was chief of staff to Andy Grove for years. I worked with Andy up until his passing. I think, it has gotten a little easier, not a lot easier, and we still have a ton of work to do. And I look at the diversity numbers of Ampere. We're a small company. I mean, I guess some people would say we're medium-sized now, and we follow it and we work on it, and we have to have a diverse slate. You have to do it every single day because it still is a little bit difficult for women to break in.